Alright guys, welcome back for another video on HAIKYU Fly High, and today we are going to talk about SP Ushijima V1, who should be out on global next week. Now the reason why he's V1 is that because on JP we have already leaks of a second version of SP Ushijima. Now we already know his kit, at least the unconfirmed version of his kit, and I already posted a video about this previously. So if you're interested on this, because it could potentially impact your decision on whether or not you want to summon for V1 version of SP Ushijima, then do check out my channel. I will try to also pin that video in the comment section if I can remember. Okay, but now today this video is mainly going to focus just on the V1 version of Ushijima. So let's start off with his kit. So for his skill 1, he's able to get some kind of buff whenever he receives the debuff. Now the main thing you guys need to bear in mind here is that he doesn't actually remove the debuff himself, so he will still be getting the debuff on him. It's just that he will be able to get some extra stat buff in order to compensate for the fact that he received that debuff. And then whenever someone make a critical touch on the team, you will be able to increase your awareness up to a maximum of 99 stack. Obviously, there's a huge number. You are not going to be able to actually stack it all the way up to here, but at the same time, you also don't actually need to stack it all the way up to here either. I'll talk about this when I talk about his skill 3, which is kind of the main things that you'll be getting as he moves to different awareness threshold. But just remember, even though the number is really high here, you are not going to get that, nor do you need to get that. Okay, now skill 2, this is going to be a jump serve with a certain number of base multiplier. It's a pretty standard multiplier number in comparison to other characters. Now when you're actually doing this serve, the enemy's receive power will reduce by 100%. However, bear in mind this reduced by 100% is actually on their multiplier. Skill multiplier is not actually to say the overall number of enemies received will drop down to 0. Okay, so to give a quick example, let's say the enemy have an ultimate receive of 250% multiplier. So for example, they will say something like they receive with a power of 250% of their receive stat. What's going to happen here when you actually do a serve is that 100% will be knocked out of that 250. So now the enemy will be receiving with a receive power of 150% of their receive stats. Okay, so this is more like a deduction. It's a subtraction from the enemy's skill multiplier. It's not to say the enemy's receive power will drop down to a big fat 0. Okay, so that's skill 2. Now move on to his skill 3, which is his core mechanic. First of all, his awareness is going to be double, which is going to be very, very important because later on you'll see some huge numbers here. But remember, you can actually half of those numbers. So for example, here, in order to get all of the buff, you need 400%. You don't actually need that. You only need 200% in order to benefit from this. Okay. Now, basically what's going to happen is that as his awareness jump to different threshold, you're going to get additional buff. When awareness is at least 200, you will be reducing your ultimate attack from 8 net crossing down to 4 net crossing. This can in fact be dropped even further once you have his skill resonance, which I'll talk about later on. Okay. Now when the awareness is no less than 350%, you will be able to increase the ultimate power for the very first time you use it every single turn. Once again, this is also a pretty nice buff to have, but just bear in mind, this is only for the very first spike of each rally. And then lastly, when it's no less than 400%, for everything over 400, you will be able to convert the awareness to strength. However, this is capped to 70%, which basically means that if you actually want to max out all of the benefit that Ushijima will be able to give you, all you need is actually just going to be 500% awareness, which once again remember, because it will be double, so in theory you actually only need 250% awareness from either his kit or from elsewhere on the field. Okay, so you definitely don't need to go as high as thinking that you need absolutely 500 awareness in order to enjoy everything. Just 250% is going to be enough. Now let's move on to his ultimate attack. He will be performing a power spike. This number, to be honest, is not that high, but remember the very first spike of each rally can actually be further buffed. So even though this only says 260 right now at level 1, your very first one for each rally, assuming you meet this awareness threshold, will actually now become 300 instead. Okay. Now the person who will be receiving this spike, if it happens to not be the same one who received the last spike, then the receive power will reduce by 50% of their receive stat. Now this is also pretty nice effect on paper. However, in reality, you do have to bear in mind that there are a couple of receivers in this game which are actually capable of spamming their ultimate receive, and in those kind of cases, this one's essentially just not going to do anything, okay? And the main ultimate spammer for receiving are going to be SP Ushijima and also SP Nishinoya. So if you're actually facing up against enemies with those two characters, then effectively you can just ignore this last sentence in his ultimate attack. However, let's say alternatively you're actually facing up against an enemy with, let's say, Komori as the liberal instead, then fine. Whenever you actually do an ultimate attack, you would likely to be able to reduce the enemy receive power by 50%, which is actually very, very nice if you're able to trigger. But once again, remember, this is not to say it will be halving the receive power. You'll be deducting 50% from their skill multiplier of their receive. Okay, so just make sure you understand this correctly. Now let's move on to his skill resonance, which are very, very important. First of all, skill resonance 2. This is the key skill resonance for him. If you're going to summon for Ushijima, you absolutely need to get him to skill resonance 2 because you will be able to reduce his cooldown limit by 4 net crossing. Now with this and also together with if your awareness is more than 200%, what's that going to mean is that in total, you'll be able to reduce your ultimate cooldown by 8 net crossing. And take a look, his ultimate cooldown only is 8 net crossings to begin with. So what that basically means is that if you have skill resonance 2, you are essentially able to spam your ultimate spikes every single time, which is absolutely insane. And that's kind of the core mechanics or the core selling point of why you may want to summon for SP Ushijima. Now, when he spikes, if the spiking power is greater than 300% of power attack stats, which remember, this is actually the greater than 300% of his power attack stats. So this is not to say necessarily if you have lots of words actually buffing up his own power attack stat, this will get triggered because if you actually buff up his own power attack stats, you'll be buffing up both sides of the equation. In order for this to actually be more than 300%, there's only pretty much one or two ways of doing it. One is first of all, you actually level up the skill for level for his skill 4. So for example, if you can't get it to level 4, then you'll be spiking with 305% of it. Okay, so that would be one way of how to trigger. The other way of triggering it would be to deal with his skill 3 ability, because remember, this can actually increase the power by 40%. So if you have 40% here and also 260% here, that in total is already going to be 300. Now, I'm not too sure whether this counts as you have to be greater than 300 or greater or equal is going to be enough. But basically what you can also consider this to be is that fact that whenever you do your first spike every single rally, because this will increase by 40% skill multiplier, this will now reach 300 and therefore you'll be able to get additional power attack stats for your very first spike of every single rally. Okay, so that's something you have to bear in mind. There's actually going to be a third way of how to increase this as well, which is using the buff stacks from Okawa. But if I'm just talking about Ushijima in silos by himself, then the only two ways he can get to this threshold by himself is either to level up his skill 4 or to actually use the very first spike of each rally. Okay, now next up we have skill resonance 4. Now, what this one does is that at the start of the match, you're going to get awareness increased by 100%. Now, this is quite crucial, mainly because if you can start off the match with 100%, what that basically means is that this will be doubled to 200, and it means your big gun, which is your ultimate cooldown, will be reduced by 4 net crossing from the very first rally. And this, in conjunction with skill resonance 2, means that he can now spamming his ultimate spike straight away from turn 1. Now, if you do not have this available, you may need to find other ways of increasing your awareness from elsewhere, or you may just have to settle with the fact that you're not actually able to spam your ultimate attack with Ushijima for, let's say, the first rally, or maybe it's even slightly longer, depending on where your awareness buff are coming from. So this is kind of the main thing skill resonance 4 is able to do. Now, eventually what's going to happen is that all of those extra awareness will also be converted to power attack stat, but in all honesty, this is going to be a pretty low number. So the main reason why you may want to get him to skill resonance 4 is just so that he will be able to start spamming his ultimate spike as soon as the first rally. Okay, so that's going to be his main kit. Now, I'm not actually going to talk about Ushijima's memory because, in my opinion, first of all, SP Kunami's memory is better for him. As for the reason why, I already talked about that in Kunami's video, so you guys can go and check that out. Now, if you do not have SP Kunami's memory, The other alternative budget version you can actually go for is going to be UR version of Ushijima's memory. And in fact, if you can actually dupe up the UR version of Ushijima's memory, it's actually going to be much better than, let's say, a base copy of any of the SP memories out there. So for no matter which scenario you fall in, whether you know you have SP Kunomi's memory or you do not, I personally do not think there's any reason to go for Ushijima's memory, and that's kind of what I'm not going to talk about here. Okay. So with all that being said, should you actually summon for SP Ushijima? Now, once again, if you're debating purely because of there's a V2 version, then do check out the video, which I will pin to the comment section or on my channel on my thoughts on the comparison between the two characters. However, the other character a lot of people would also be comparing Ushijima against is actually going to be Aaron Ojira, because first of all, he's an SSR character, so it's very easy to obtain, and also get him to, let's say, skill rating 5. And because Aaron Ojira is also the only other character in this game who can guarantee to spam without any conditions, he will just be able to spam all of his ultimate attack. That basically makes him the most likable replacement to SP Ushijima if you choose to not summon for him. And especially considering the fact that you actually need to get SP Ushijima to minimum skill resistance 2, even for him to spam. A lot of time, if you're actually on a low budget, then Aaron Ojiro, just the max to Aaron Ojiro just seems to be a much cost-effective way of you playing this kind of team composition with one spiker spamming all of the attacks, rather than needing to somehow, do, let's say, 200 summons on Ushijima's banner to get him to skill resistance 2. Okay, so that's probably going to be the biggest decision you have to make, which is whether or not you actually want to summon for Ushijima or just stick with the low budget Aaron Ojiro as skill resistance 5 instead. Okay, and in fact, I feel like there's enough of a topic to make a separate video on this, so I am actually gonna plan to make a video probably in a day or 2 days time. I will try to do it before Ushijima's banners out, but essentially I will be comparing between Aaron Jiro as skill resistance 5 versus SP Ushijima as skill resistance 2, just so you guys know exactly what are actually going to be the difference between the two characters, and hopefully that will help you guys to decide whether or not you actually want to summon for him. Okay, so yeah, so do wait for my video if you still need a bit further confirmation. However, if you already made up your mind straight away, then do let me know in the comment section if you will be summoning for him.